into that one, and maybe Baylor would have been the favorite.
Now that we've talked about what happened in that game, I want to try and give a sense to the listener of what was accomplished by Scott Drew. For people who don't know, and it's weird, it's all of it is embedded in our minds because we were sentient sports people back in 2003. But for the fan that goes, wait, what do you mean there was a scandal at Baylor? Can you describe what it is that Scott Drew was walking into when he took this job back then?
Yeah, because when you think of a scandal in college sports, you think of, somebody getting paid under the table or, a coach doing something sleazy. Well, this was the case. I mean, a coach did something sleazy, but this involved murder. It wasn't the head coach that was involved in the murder, but the head coach of one of his players killed another player. I mean, it's as ugly as it got. Patrick Denny, he was murdered by his Baylor teammate. Now, in Dave Bliss, the head coach, came under some NCAA fire for potential sanctions, and he basically, by all reports, tried to blame the murdered player and tried to get others to blame the murdered player. And all this came out, and not only did Baylor get hit with penalties that were almost as bad as the death penalty, but Baylor was Baylor at the time. And Baylor, as you know, as people who have followed college sports for 30 plus years, Baylor was no man's land. They were nothing. I mean, we heard it this past week. Final Four for the first time since 1950. Championship game for the first time since 48. Baylor was one of the worst programs in the country for a long time, and they were looked at as the redheaded stepchild in the Big 12. I mean, they joined the Big 12, but they were, and 12 fans didn't want to claim Baylor. I mean, that was a terrible program. And then you have this awful murder and scandal on top of it. And who the heck would want to go to Waco, Texas, and try to clean up that mess? For whatever reason, Scott Drew, who I think he had only coached one season at Valpo as a head coach. He was an assistant for his dad. But for whatever reason, he decided that was going to be something he wanted to do. And I think one of the reasons that I've read that he did that was because he knew that there was no chance you could go any lower. So if you take this job, it's only going to go up. It took a long time, though. I mean, he got there and they were still Baylor really bad for the first 3 years. And one of those years, I think it was either his third or his fourth year, because of the sanctions that were imposed, they weren't even allowed to play non-conference games. They didn't play their first game of the season until after the new year. And it was just Big 12 play, and that was it. And he had an awful record his first 4 seasons. But then in that 5th season, they started to become respectable. And I think by the 5th, 6th season, they made the tournament. By the 7th, 8th season, they made the Elite 8. And I mean, just that turnaround was, it's hard to even put into words what he did in those first 8 years. But then got back to the Elite 8 a few years after that, got back again, and then this team, which could have won it all last year, and COVID shuts everything down. They come back, they start the season perfect. They get shut down by COVID. We're thinking maybe it's derailed their season. They lose a couple games late. And then to put on the performance that they did in the NCAA tournament, I mean, it's got to go down as one of the greatest coaching jobs of all time. And certainly, we call certain things like this a rebuild. This wasn't a rebuild because they were never built to begin with. I mean, they were built back in the 50s, and they were terrible for 50 years. And then Scott Drew came along, and I mean, it was a fairy tale turnaround.
Chris Hassel does a ton of great work for CBS HQ, covering college basketball, calling college basketball, and we're talking with him this morning about the incredible run that Baylor went on to win the national championship. I'm glad that you said it that way because I think that you're right. I think that this is one of the greatest coaching jobs ever. If you look at it in the totality, if you look at everything, because there was nothing there. Like, they were being negatively recruited in the worst possible ways with truth. Like, a lot of times when there's negative recruiting, that negative recruiting is based on, like, hearsay and rumors. Here was an actual scandal that other coaches were using against Baylor, and I wonder if there was ever a point where Scott Drew had given up faith in this, and it seems like there wasn't really a time when that happened.
And I know that he's a man of strong faith. I mean, I think that was one of the first things he said. And whether you like that or not, that's, I'm not a religious guy. But I think for him, maybe that really helps. I mean, going down to Baylor and trying to build this thing up and not losing faith because he, for whatever reason, did believe he was called to do this. And you can snicker at it, but he was right. And I think that there was even that, I mentioned that first 8 years where he went from, taking over after a murder and a horrible scandal to getting them to the Elite Eight. But then, the last several years, I don't think he had made an Elite Eight since, it was almost a decade, like 2012 was his last Elite Eight. So it wasn't like Baylor was knocking on the door of a championship over the last 5 years. I mean, they were always respectable. They were always going to the tournament, but they weren't, they weren't a perennial power or anything like that. And then, for whatever reason, I think a lot of it was the transfer portal, and it's the way things are now. You got some of these guys to come in there and kind of caught lightning in a bottle, and when he got that, he showed how good of a coach that he could be. And I think it certainly speaks to not only his ability to coach, but his relationship with players, because you can't just bring in these great transfer guys to play for you if you're not fun to play for, if you're not a coach that the players like. Because he's not recruiting them to Austin, he's not recruiting them to Chapel Hill. This is still Waco. And I know it's not Lubbock. I think Lubbock is probably harder to recruit to, but it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and certainly there's really no major history. The women's program has been great, but no history with men's basketball, and up until several years ago, no history with football either. But I think what he's done is truly remarkable. It really is. I mean, it's somebody, I think they did, I don't know if it was a 30 for 30 or it might have just been an HBO documentary on what happened with the scandal. And I was thinking that now that this thing's come full circle, there needs to be like
a revisiting. Yeah, like now you go back to it and look at it, because it's crazy that they were able to get to this point, and it really was amazing, like in the era of Twitter, to see the people being like, what do you mean that there is a scandal at Baylor? And you go, I know exactly how old you are, because I know that you don't know what was happening down there before that. Let me take you out. Let me take you out here and go and take a big picture view of college basketball. What did you think of the tournament overall with the first COVID tournament happening?
I thought it went better than